with COVID, we are seeing actually a lot of people who were well heeled, much better to do, much better off, and still sitting on the fences actually come into the buying fold. So we are definitely seeing penetration of food delivery and usage of food apps, etc., going up significantly across all segments. There are safety concerns, but I think these changes are material.
Welcome to Prime Venture Partners Podcast, a podcast for entrepreneurs looking to build and grow their startups. Learn about uncommon strategies and common traps from makers and doers of startup ecosystem.
Welcome to the Prime Venture Partners Podcast. Today, I'm delighted to have with me a dear friend and the CEO of Zomato Delivery and co-founder of Zomato, Mohit Gupta. Welcome to the show, Mohit.
Thanks, Amit. I'm glad to be here.
Mohit, it would be great if you can tell people a little bit about your background. Of course, you and I met at Make My Trip, but maybe just your whole sort of career journey. That would be helpful.
Sure, Amit. So I started my career, I spent a year at Voltas, but more importantly, post my MBA, I started my career with Pepsi, spent 10 years there, doing a bunch of different sales, marketing, general management roles. Then spent 10 years at Make My Trip, where we more than just met. And I spent 10 years at Make My Trip, saw its journey through various phases. Of course, the IPO and well beyond that to the mega merger, etc. Fun journey. I joined Zomato about 2 years ago, and I'm now running food delivery for Zomato.
Wonderful, Mohit. I know you as one of the few people that has sort of reinvented him so many times during this kind of journey. And so maybe towards the end, we'll talk a little bit about how, what your reinvention mantra is and how you've been so successful at all the stints, right? Pepsi, Make My Trip, and now Zomato. So, but without further ado, let's talk about, how COVID has impacted, the food and the retail sector in general, right? Love to hear your thoughts in terms of consumer behavior, in terms of the market, in terms of the business, what has changed, what hasn't.
So we are 4 months into the COVID situation, so much has been said on the subject, but here's my little take. So I think adoption of a whole bunch of online services has increased significantly because of COVID. A lot of people who were fence sitters have been tipped over. And in food services also, for example, a lot of restaurants who were not participating in food delivery, have taken it a lot more seriously. A lot more gourmet restaurants, high-end restaurants have started delivering and participating in delivery meaningfully. It's becoming a more important part of their business, of course. In customer segments also, we've seen very similar things play out. Earlier, for example, having already crossed life till date 100 million install mark, we were beginning to see actually lower end phones, etc., coming in as a much larger part of our user base. But with COVID, we are seeing actually a lot of people who were well heeled, much better to do, much better off, and still sitting on the fences actually come into the buying fold. So we are definitely seeing penetration of food delivery and usage of food apps, etc., going up significantly across all segments. There are safety concerns, but I think these changes are material. Workplaces have changed, of course, and with that, food at workplaces, cafeterias have also changed significantly. Health and hygiene, and it's relevant to us as individuals, as users, has changed significantly. And I think some of it is here to stay. We are going to look at health, hygiene, safety practices quite differently. And that has an impact on both user preferences, brand proposition, as well as the supply chains that we build. And I think finally, for me, what is most germane is that human relationships and what defines them has changed significantly in my view. Me vis-a-vis my family, vis-a-vis myself, my company, how I interact with brands, my community, my country, all of those things I think have changed significantly. And some of that is also here to stay. And I think it's going to have a meaningful impact on how brand building, culture, career drivers, etc., play out for us in future.
Great, Mohit. So if I look at, I was just reading some reports about food delivery in the US, and in particular, some of this concept of drive-through restaurants, right? Like McDonald's and so forth. Those kinds of concepts don't exist now, right? And even if I go on the Zomato app or the Zomato site, you give me the health and safety ratings, you give me, even when I get the food delivery, it says, okay, this was contactless, etc. Do you think things like that will start to happen in India now, and that fundamentally people will go lesser to restaurants and get sort of more delivery either at home or perhaps like this US kind of notion of a drive-through and pickup?
So I think that kind of polarization is definitely likely to happen, although I do have a view on the drive-through and takeaway business in India. And I think some of that, let's talk about the takeaway piece first. I think Indian cities are not configured well for takeaways. Takeaways require a certain kind of kitchen configuration, drive-through configuration, parking. The location of the restaurant has to be in high street, and there has to be a large enough driveway. And that doesn't happen even for larger, more organized players like McDonald's, etc. So we've done a few pilots with players like McDonald's and thought through this in terms of activation and pilots, but it's not an infrastructure that lends itself very well to takeaway. Delivery and dining out actually is definitely going to change significantly in my view. I don't think dining out is going away anytime soon. Of course, the COVID situation, until such time as this concern persists, dining out is going to be deeply depressed and it will take time coming back. But I think the need for people to hang out together, to be social, to celebrate together is a deep, long-term human need. And I think, therefore, dining out continues to have a bright future. I think what it's doing for delivery, though, is that it's definitely opening up users to the benefits, the core benefits of delivery, and opening up many more use cases, between food players and users.
Great, Mohit. So have you seen I'm sure the orders are down quite a bit. Have you seen difference in what people are ordering? For example, are people inherently ordering more things that they feel might be touchless, like a pizza, right? So you feel mentally that, hey, we'll just put it in an oven, they'll pull it out, as opposed to, something that might require, like maybe mixing with the hand or something, right? Irrespective of whatever you say on Zomato or
Sure.
of the other guys.
So, Amit, we have seen a couple of trends in that direction, some intuitive, some counterintuitive. So we are not necessarily seeing touchless things, so to say, gain share. The uncooked stuff, right? Raw salad, sushi, stuff like that is definitely down. People are going for well-cooked stuff. But outside of that, I think people are ordering everything that they like. We have seen a shift actually towards more indulgent food types. So people seem to be getting a lot of home food. So when they order from outside, they are definitely ordering more outside food, so to say.
Not ghar ka khana.
Not ghar ka khana, not healthy food. So I think healthy food, which was emerging to be a fairly large category, that category is definitely not having its best time right now.
Wonderful. So switching gears, Mohit, I remember meeting Dipinder of then Foodie Bay 10 years ago when we were both at Make My Trip, and started out being a review site and a very successful one at that, and then went on to now, you guys are, at least some of the reports I've read and interviews of Dipinder, like a full stack food provider. And of course, you've single-handedly driven and accelerated the food delivery business. So very few companies, right, globally, if I think about it, not just in food, but in other businesses, have made this transition from, more a reviews and an informational and a content type of site, right? From our previous life, TripAdvisor is one that comes to mind, to a transaction site. So what has made that happen at Zomato? Love to have our listeners hear a little bit about that story.
Sure, Amit. So I think you've called it out well. I think it is very difficult to straddle both these worlds, to build both these capabilities under one brand, one roof. And to that extent, we are thankful. My own take on some of the things that have contributed strongly to this would be, I think first one is the unique blend of business acumen and product design expertise, user understanding. I think that's a very, very important thing. And that's common to both. I don't think that you can build any successful business without that. And I think that continues to be a strong core competence, so to say, for us. The second one, I think, is a more behavioral thing, which is being, very open and brutally honest with ourselves. On what muscle you have, what you don't have. I don't think unless you acknowledge that early enough in your journey and you are sort of almost a little paranoid about that, you're really going to build out new muscles very well. And I think this is something that Zomato and Dipinder do very, very well. The third one is almost pathological flexibility in terms of, just trying out everything that you can or you have to, and not letting your own sort of well-held perceptions come in the way of what you try out to seek the outcome. So brutally go after outcomes and just be absolutely flexible in whatever it takes to really get there. And I think the fourth one, which has helped us actually come in from behind and become a market leader in the food delivery business, is our ambition and big vision, I would say. I think it does two things for us. It drives us, and it also allows us to think like a leader even when we are behind. right? And I think that thinking like a leader, even when you're coming from behind, is so important because otherwise you're just catching up all the time. So I think those would be some of the things that come to mind.
You said a lot of interesting things in there, Mohit, and I want to unpack those, right? So pathological flexibility, thinking like a leader when you're behind, identifying the muscle that you don't have and acknowledging it and perhaps going and building it. So maybe let's elaborate on all three in no particular order. How do you identify, right? Let's say, this is, I don't know, whenever Zomato delivery was launched 3-4 years ago, or that, hey, we don't have this capability. We are a great tech product company. We're a great, content company, etc. And you decide that, delivery is important. How do you go about that, both that assessment and how do you go about building it, right? Because inherently, you're identifying, right, that you don't have it. Like, I'm just curious if you can elaborate some light.
Sure. So I'll give you my perspective, and of course, since I've spent only 2 years here, some of it is also interpretations of, the various things I've seen and heard. I think the first one is about strong intuition and being open to your own faults, having a very, very strong self-critical point of view always. You have to be super competent, of course, if you're going to build something big and you're going to sort of create something new, solve difficult problems. But at the same time, I think being self-critical and deep introspection allows you to really look around the bend and find the muscles that you don't have. I think when it comes to building these muscles, you've got to try a lot of things. And Zomato has tried a lot of things, right? Some of it goes to some of our outside perception as a kind of employers we've been along the way at some point in time, and so on and so forth, right? People coming and leaving and so on and so forth. So I don't think that there was one magical formula to really build it out. But I think we were good at identifying capabilities that were out there, having a lot of respect for these competencies that people had built. One of the biggest contributors to our success in food delivery has been our acquisition of Runner and the Runner team that came with that acquisition, right? And just integrating them very deeply, which also comes from having respect for their competency and their capabilities.
Wonderful, Mohit. The two other things you said, I've never heard this term before, pathological flexibility. What does that mean? Can you kind of elaborate?
I think it's almost like saying that, on the things that affect you even most deeply, right? The things that are most sacred for you, you are going to be flexible even about those things. So it's almost like, data, logic, right? And your outcomes are pretty much the only thing that matter for you, and that everything else is up for change.
Wonderful. And last but not the least, thinking like a leader, even when you're behind.
So I think, that really comes down to also some of my life experiences and, fundamental configuration, of how Dippy thinks as well. And, what we found was that there were portions where, it's very easy for you to say, look, somebody else has really solved this problem. All we need to do is to replicate that. And it does get you the next 10% market share and the next 20% or 50% month-on-month growth when you're really early stages or mid stages. And it's very easy to get carried with that and just keep doing those things and keep replicating what an early mover or a leader is doing. But I think it's important to understand that that's not going to be the thing that gets you ahead, because you're just copying, right? You've got to have your own unique take. You've got to think about how you're going to be as you think like a leader. When you are the player driving that industry, solving the problems of that industry from the front. And when you do that, you open new pathways that create unique advantage for you that goes beyond just, money and execution.
Very, very interesting, Mohit. Lots of lessons there, I think, for our entrepreneurs here. So switching gears and just pushing this analogy of going from reviews to delivery, this whole notion of a super app, right? So if you look at, Meituan Dianping in China or even in India, a lot of people have tried different things, right? Our buddies at Paytm tried selling flights and, Make My Trips getting to delivery, and Swiggy wants to do what Dunzo wants to do, and and so forth, right? So what do you think is the appetite of the Indian consumer really to live in a mega super app? It does everything. It does flights, delivery, food, flowers, the works, right? Because China seemed to have been successful at sort of doing these super app type things, right? Whereas in India, usually, at least my bias has been that, maybe you'll succeed on a couple of use cases, but to really be this, I'll book my cabs also here, flight also here, food also here, seems like a little bit of a tall order for me personally, but love to hear your take on the emergence of super apps in India.
Yeah. So Amit, on that one, I'm with you actually. And it's not that I don't have an open mind about apps doing multiple use cases. I do think that apps can do multiple things for users effectively, but it's very, very hard. So, if you have to be the number one, number two service in each of the categories that you're participating in, I think that's what it takes for an app to be the go-to app for a user for multiple categories. And a single category itself is hard. Building multiple categories is hard at so many levels. From UX to domain expertise to supply chains and everything else around it, right? So that's one of the reasons why I think it's difficult. The other one, I think it is also a factor of how the ecosystem evolves. If the most competent answer to a problem emerges as a separate app, then it's likely that it's going to emerge a single or a few use case kind of apps, right? A few use cases sort of that hang together for users, and that the company offering it or the app offering it is really, really competent in. But if such individual competent answers don't emerge, and they tend to emerge from the same house of or a single mother app, then it's likely that it will emerge as a super app, which I don't think seems to be how India is playing out.
Very interesting, Mohit. So switching gears, Mohit, you run a lot of digital businesses and some quote unquote phygital ones, if I can say that. But, Zomato delivery or Zomato orders is as intensely operational as they come, right? So can you talk to us a little bit about both your learnings as well as, some of the lessons for building an intensely operational business successfully, whether it's business, technology, whatever, right? Even your own personal adaptation to this challenge that you've taken on.
Sure. So I think I went through a full cycle on this through my own experiences. Of course, you start off by saying that, domain expertise is most important. You have people out there who've already done something like this, exactly like this, or similar to this. Let's just acquire that domain expertise and that experience and build it out with that. But I think that's oversimplification, and I'm not seeing that to be very successful. I think fundamentally, what these young businesses are doing is really developing a better version of the physical reality that exists right now. And therefore, to my mind, strong first principle thinking and process orientation tends to be the most important thing. So it's not necessarily domain expertise. It's good to seed some amount of domain expertise into the team so that you're not reinventing the wheel and wasting energy and resources on that. But by and large, most of the critical portions of the team, its leadership especially, needs to have strong first principle thinking, process orientation, and needs to be good with people, good with teams with large people. So that's what I've seen to be working.
How about the role of technology, Mohit? So one is process, right? Which is just, Six Sigma process, operations research, those kinds of things which we probably studied or did not study in our earlier days. But how important a role does technology play in this?
Yeah, so I'm glad you pointed that out, Amit, because I think it's very, very critical that the team has a strong desire to use technology better. It's not necessarily an anti-people view. It's just the desire to create a more efficient system. What I've seen is that if you're on either extremes, if you're either on one hand saying, look, this is the only way that this can be solved, I'm going to throw thousands of people at this problem, this is how the offline world does it, and that's how I'm going to solve it, it doesn't move you forward, doesn't create a better answer. Similarly, if you just take a pure product and tech view and say everything the machines are going to do, and they're going to do that in V1 or V2 itself, that's also likely to fail because it takes time to really build efficient tech systems that are able to aid in the process of creating a better answer. So I think it's a part where you have a strong desire to create a better answer and you're keen to use technology to get there. That sort of is the best balance.
So I'm going to throw a little googly at you, right? Because I know you also do a little bit of angel investments and so forth. And certainly when I think about Prime Ventures, we tend to shy away from operationally intensive businesses because we don't understand them, we don't understand how to evaluate them, perhaps, and sometimes we don't know what competency to look for in the entrepreneur. So let's say I'm an entrepreneur pitching you an operationally intensive business, right? What are the 2-3 things that you would look for, before you decide to, let's even say, just angel invest for now?
So I think first off, I would say that the core principles of judging an entrepreneur, whether for a digital or a physical business, for me will remain the same. It has to be that deep desire to create a better answer, a belief that it exists out there. I would look for whether the entrepreneur has actually invested a lot of time and energy in understanding the space really well and has the early green shoots of a better answer to that area or not. I would also look for, fundamentally in a physical business, I would look for better appreciation of large teams and how to work with large teams of people. Because even if an entrepreneur is not going to be personally leading a team of hundreds or thousands or even 50, 100 people, it takes a certain amount of empathy and understanding of how that works to be able to build that company and that ecosystem. And those are some of the things that I would look for.
Fascinating. And any kind of other attributes, like you said, the domain expertise is also important, right? When you're two kind of guys, gals, starting out like with a dog in a garage kind of thing, and you have no domain expertise, right? In fact, when I think about perhaps, Mohit of the acquisition that you guys did, right? Runner. Perhaps he had no delivery experience. I remember meeting him when very early on in his journey. Like, how do you figure out that they'll figure it out? Is that just what you said earlier? First principles thinking, passion for the problem, being open-minded? Or is there some, like we have this notion of founder market fit thing, this person is inherently like one attribute you pointed out, which is people, right? Is there anything else?
Yeah, that's a very interesting concept, founder market fit. I would say the second point that I mentioned, Amit, which is I expect a founder to have invested enough time to at least eke out some meaningful insights or solutions about that domain that even domain experts are not seeing on the surface right now, right? That's super important. I mean, it doesn't have to be a complete solution. It can have holes in it, but there have to be these early powerful insights that they've invested themselves into mining out, which tell you that this person has the ability to do it.
Awesome. One last question before we get to kind of wrap up here and talk a little bit about your past experiences as well. Functionally, you've done various things, right? You've run a business, you're now the CEO, you've been the head of marketing. I don't fully remember what all you did at Pepsi, but I'm sure it's a mix of all of those things, right? So how have you kind of made these transitions? And where does marketing sit for Mohit today? Because I know you're very passionate about that, right? Does that play a role, or you have somebody that does it and you're sort of more being a mentor and perhaps a coach?
I'm definitely a mentor and a coach. I'm definitely not a mainstream marketer now. I think you asked two questions and maybe answer both of them. So I think for me, the reason why I think I've done moderately well at making these transitions is because I'm fundamentally a very curious person. And what has fascinated me from the beginning is end goals and outcomes. And I realized early enough in my career that usually end goals and outcomes are a result of a combination of many things, almost never a single thing. So you can actually be a great marketer and solve one part of the problem, but if you are going to deliver great outcomes, change the destiny of a business, solve meaningful problems for users, it usually takes more than just one functional area to do it, or one stream to do it, right? And that combined with the curiosity to learn more and to understand better, I think has been a significant part of what allowed me to transition from one to the other and understand multiple areas better. The second question was, in terms of marketing, where do I stand? I think I realized at some point in my career that I wasn't going to be a better marketer than a certain level. And I think MakeMyTrip deserved a better marketer. And I remember having this conversation with Deep and Rajesh, where while they wanted me to recruit a marketer under me, I insisted that we recruit a CMO separately, and one who could sort of take the company forward much ahead of where I could take the company. And to my mind, and with Saujanya coming into the company, that decision turned out to be a wonderful one for the company and for me. And it was great learning for me as well, that it's good to be able to see your own glass ceilings on these things and then step back and try to play a more holistic anchoring role rather than a domain role in an area.
I would be very remiss in not talking about your curiosity. I'll just mention a very small incident. I remember you constantly asking me how to become a coder and to write code. And back, like 7, 8, 9 years ago. And I was like, dude, like, really, that's what you want to do? And it's like, no, on the weekend, I'm going to sit and code. So can you tell me where do I get started? So anyway, as we wrap up here, Mohit, like I said at the beginning of the podcast, you had multiple kind of reincarnations, right, in your career. And there are a lot of folks, like even I had come from Google into MakeMyTrip and so forth, who basically weren't entrepreneurs in the classic sense, right? Perhaps were entrepreneurs, perhaps were aspirationally, joining younger companies, etc. So can you take our readers and listeners through this journey? So if you're somebody sitting in a large company doing well and you have this dream of either starting up or joining a startup, how should they think about it? How did you think about it? How have you made these transitions? That would be very useful.
So, my drivers initially were the usual ones, but I think what I'd like to share with everyone is possibly wisdom in hindsight. So I think what matters the most is your own motivations, right? Deep introspection into your own motives is very, very important. And you need to be brutally honest with yourself. You need to ask yourself, why do you want to start up on your own or join a startup, right? Really ask yourself that, test it with how bad do you really want it? What are you really willing to give up for it? Compensation, risk that come with it, perks, status, all of those things, right, that you're putting at risk. I have seen far too many people actually, want to join startups just because it's the cool thing to do. It's the next thing to do. You hear stories about a few exits and so on and so forth. And at the very least, it can be a nice plug into your CV. And I don't think that those kind of motivations really set you up well for success. So I think people who get to the right point, I think joining an early stage, mid stage startup and then living through the journey, because these journeys tend to be long, 5, 7, 10 years, is almost like starting up. So if you do it, you're going to make many pivots personally, as an individual, as a professional, if you're going to succeed mid to long term in this area. So motivations are really, really important.
And one last question, Mohit. Let me flip the role. Let's say you were hiring somebody from a larger company, or you were a young early stage entrepreneur hiring somebody senior like you or me into their company. What would you look for? Is it just the inverse of what you said? Or are there some traits that you would look for to make sure that this person who's coming will survive and in fact thrive?
I think 3 things, and very different weightages now, compared to what they were in sort of 5 years ago for even me. I think domain expertise, maybe 10, 15%, because that matters, especially when you're hiring senior people. That means you're in growth stage and that matters to the business. Competence, about 40%, I would say. And when I say competence, I mean it differently from domain expertise and experience, right? It's just core fundamental competence that an individual has. And I think the largest component, which is about 50%, is culture fit and chemistry. Because at senior levels, almost always hiring a person into a family, you're hiring a co-founder into the business. So I think there's nothing that is more important than culture fit into company and chemistry with the other top leaders in the company who they're going to work with.
Wonderful, Mohit. Lots and lots of interesting insights for our listeners to take away. So thanks again, Mohit, for taking the time to be on the Prime Venture Partners podcast. It was great to have you.
Thank you for having me, Amit. Thank you so much.
Dear listeners, thank you for listening to this episode of the podcast. Subscribe now on your favorite podcast app for free, and you'll be the first one to know when new episodes are available. Just search for Prime Venture Partners podcast in Apple Podcast, Spotify, Castbox, or however you get your podcasts. Then hit subscribe. And if you have enjoyed the show, we would be really grateful if you leave us a review on Apple Podcast. To read the full transcript, find the link in the show notes.